Welcome to this little playlist I'm going to put together. This is going to be aimed at sample users who are a little tired of using like full string patches and just a key switch or something, which seems to be a very trending thing amongst sample makers in general. They're all aiming at these really big sounds that immediately come out as everything playing at once, lots of overlap, and it's kind of unrealistic in a way. So we're going to move away from that and take tricks that you could do with samples that are actual real tricks, which can produce some very interesting results. And we're going to repeatedly use some of these tricks. I'm just going to take this one little simple chromatic neighbor tone kind of move as if it's an A minor, because most people can use A minor. And I'm not thinking of Hungarian minor just because I'm using that flat 5. It's just a flat 5 to me. There's not enough information given there doing that to say we're Hungarian minor. Because I could do something like this, which is all just using chromatic neighbor tones. So bear with me as we get the basic concept out of the way, then we're going to use it. This little trick here is something that Rimsky-Korsakov, for instance, and Ravel, they love to use Piz combinations with bowing techniques to double parts. So it's going on that little ostinato. Now this is most often called stuff like sautille or spiccato. That's at this tempo. And they're going to be very tempo dependent. So, but you still put the little dot on the note indicating either one of these, just like a staccato, but a staccato is way too heavy. So if you have access to any of these two types of patches, you're better off. Even though this is very hard to emulate with samples, staccato is going to be too thick. So this is what's happening. It's just playing the first note in Piz of this little repeating ostinato. In violins too. Now you can always do this. I cut this completely out of here. And let me grab the... You could always do it as a divided group just in one group. Oops, I forgot to put a rest in there. Hold on. Like such. Now, the notation program is not going to play it back correct if I put in like... let me just indicate that this would be a divided technique. So basically one group of the divided section doing Piz, the other is playing with the bow. So this is the basic concept, and you'd have to... Let me get that in there. Chuck the Piz out. In order for this to actually play back right on this notation program, probably most notation programs, is to actually have separate staves. So now on to the fun stuff. Make this an exercise. Create something that you can do with this to use it. I'm going to create a little traveling effect from the first violins to the basses. That's what I'm going to do with it to use it. So you get that panning across groups effects, which you can't do with full strings, by the way, because they're so overlapped. You don't really hear it as well and distinct. So I'm just going to write that out, what I just did on the keyboard. Now I'm not going to bother talking about articulations in general. We're just going to stick in dots. And that little riff I played on the keyboard. And then 1/8 note hitting the first note of that little... Well, can't really call it an ostinato now because it's going to fall through groups. And for me personally, this is more fun to problem solve these things going from top to bottom, because you actually do have to stop and think sometimes. And we may have to in this instance. Now if you're playing a full strings patch, you're going to have so much overlap, but you could just simply walk through it by playing the keyboard. But you miss that complete and total separation of groups. Not only that, if you rely on full strings, you have that one key switch between Piz and then bowing techniques. It's not going to do it. You have to actually start creating a bunch of separate tracks. So looking at this, I'm going to start it an octave higher. I'm going to go ahead and raise the Piz an octave up. And we're going to try to create a universal scheme. So this is where sometimes there's problem solving. So it works out so far, but what I'm going to do is, and we'll talk about problem solving in another episode where we take a keyboard part and make it into a string part. Well, what I'm going to do is double that Piz at the octave below. And it's also going to fall between groups. So this is kind of a process of working your parts out creatively instead of just playing it on a keyboard with full strings. And again, our goal is to make things more interesting and have a lot more separation. So it's going to fall down in octaves like that. They're already displaced by an octave, but they're going to fall down in octaves as well. So we need to get the cellos involved right away. To have that second octave fall, I need an eighth note. What's interesting is everything's just based off of doubling the first note of this little run. And when you start doing tricks like this, you have a lot more independence and you have a bunch of horizontal little lines instead of chords. Because that's all that's going to happen here. In addition to having different groups be doing different things at different times. The short bowing part fell an octave. The octave displaced Piz fell an octave. And we're going to keep repeating this little pattern. We may have to problem solve it. So now this little short line is going to be in the violas. Go ahead and paste it there. Quicker than writing it in, and stick a rest in between. Down an octave. And we're good to go. Now here's where fun problem solving comes in. Since the run is ending on violins too and starting on violas, we have the cellos and the violins 1 to take over that octave Piz fall. This is what's fun about doing stuff like this. And luckily that octave displacement is still in the violins 1 range. And the one thing I've learned over the years when I used to hand stuff like this over to real string players is they're more capable than you think most of the time. That's the wrong note. As I stick this marking in, there used to be in the old days of sampling, a lot of people in the community were actual players. So it was good to be around groups like that as you listen to that, because you can consult people, and they were actually using the programs to write their own music. And not everybody was out to just do film score style music. People actually wanted to mock up their own works that were concert based. Now I can see something that's going to be a little problematic here already. We're going to go ahead and transfer that to the cellos so it keeps traveling. I have to cut the last note out and then insert a bar. I'll show you what the problem is in a second. Go ahead and transpose the cellos down an octave because we just borrowed them from the violas. Remember, it's supposed to be traveling and displacing octaves. So when you do separate things like this and deal with real ranges, you might run into issues like I'm going to show you here in a second. So having transposed that, so it's continuous octave jump and traveling. Right here, the violas are ending and the cellos are starting. But that Piz part is out of the range of the violins now. So we're going to problem solve this. We're going to take the basses, stick in a dotted half rest, and we're going to go ahead and divide them here and use Piz. That way we can continue this downward pizzicato that's offsetted by an octave. Or I should say offset. Octave stops are possible, but you're dealing with Piz, so immediately followed by rapid bowing, so we're going to divide it. And thus we've problem solved the situation of this constant octave falling pizzicato. Oops, wrong note. And so we now have this. Now it just needs to end in the basses. Again, if you use like full strings, you don't have to think about these range issues at all. And luckily, most sample libraries still keep the typical ranges of instruments intact when they're separated. So the run is finishing in the cellos. Now it's time for the basses to take it, and then we're done. Our little exercise is over. And we're going to do more panning type exercises. I would call it panning, but that's technically not the term, where it's in your stereo field starting from one side and going to the other. And for me, these produce really cool, interesting effects, and I love stuff like this. And now the basses are taken over where the cellos left off an octave lower. The basses are an octave lower. Remember, the written pitch on a bass clef for basses sounds an octave lower, if you didn't know that. What we'll do is just create a little ending for ourselves. Octave displaced Piz on the last bar. There's only 2 bars of our composition here, but it's an exercise. Always do exercises with stuff you just learned. Don't just read about it or see it in a score. Do it yourself and actually use it. That gives you the experience, and you'll actually remember these tricks later on. And we'll use this trick later on in later episodes, but now we have something that goes this direction in the stereo field. So that's a really cool effect that you could do with your samples. So my suggestion is, well, I just cleaned it up a little bit, had it put in some rests, and maybe re-imply that this would be a unison line from divided to unison. Now, as I stated before, don't just read about it in a book or watch someone else do it. Write a short piece around a specific concept. And that's exactly what I did here. This opened the video, actually. And the one thing I will say about this, doing stuff like this, is that it actually creates a little bit of horizontal realm style writing. No chords except on the triple stops. And so you rely less and less on chords and use more and more effects like this. But it still feels like we have a direction. Let's go ahead and move on to the next episode.